Welcome to Real Coaching Radio, the podcast for coaches by coaches. We are here to teach you how to get the most out of your clients and yourself. This is where beauty meets the beast, brains meet brawn, and science meets, well, bro science. Welcome to Real Coaching Radio.
Different types of progressive overload. So how to actually progress your training, how to get fitter, how to get stronger, how to build muscle. We're going to go through some of the techniques that we use today and kind of rate the ones that we think you guys should focus on the most and probably what people get wrong. So without any further ado, please enjoy the episode. Give us a 5-star rating and review on iTunes. A review would be nice. Like, I really like this podcast because it helps me to get fit and strong. Something like that would be great. You can't really do that on Spotify, but if you're listening on Spotify, by all means, screenshot this, put it on your story, tag Real Coaching Radio, at Mark Origin Series, at Hack the Body, Hack the Mind on Instagram. We would very much appreciate it. Thank you so much, guys. Enjoy this episode. Enjoy it, enjoy it, enjoy it. We are Real Coaching Radio. One day, I'm going to have a room and a studio somewhere in some sort of facility with a microphone in where life would be easy and we just walk into a nice room.
Our own little studio.
We're back in the wooden yoga studio.
Maybe that's the goal, our own little studio.
That is like eventually where it's going to go, he says. We just got to make sure we do one every week.
Yeah.
I think it would be easier though. I think like having the ability to like kind of start doing more interviews and stuff like that going forward. Like I've got space and time now to be able to look at getting them sorted, because I think before I was just so concentrated on like, I didn't have a system before of how I was going to do things. So this is quite good. This is what my system is at the moment. So every 2 weeks I change what content I focus on.
Okay.
So the first 2 weeks at the moment, like I basically just write my blogs. From my blogs, I create my posts, and then I create videos around the blogs. The first 2 weeks is blogs, second 2 weeks is posts, third 2 weeks is videos.
Okay.
And it works so much better because like before I was going, I've got to do videos, blogs, posts.
Yeah. All of it together, yeah.
And it's like, it was killing me because like, I think the structure side of it has been the hardest thing for me to find out because it always changes, but it's like, how do you get control off of something that always changes? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. And I guess it's, well, you're always just trying to do too much at once, aren't you?
Yeah.
And I guess that's what a lot of people do with training. Just try and do too much at once.
And that was a great segue. That was a really good segue. We are going to be talking about different types of progressive overload today and kind of, I guess, almost put them in a hierarchy, but give you a good idea of like different ways you can approach kind of making progression within your training and give you something to focus on as you leave. If we are going to do a hierarchy, what would you say is number one?
Well, I know people are going to have a different opinion on this, like, but for me, like, it's add weight.
Yeah. No, I think the running add weight with the caveat of standardize your form.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which basically means keep your form the same, and if your form is the same week to week, you can add weight. So don't just add weight if it means you have to completely change the way you do the movement. Like every exercise is a skill. You want to perform the skill the correct way. And if you are going to go, oh, Mark said I got progressive overload and add weight, so I'm just going to like not even think about the way I'm going to do that. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about keeping the form as good as it can be. And like there's a range, but like good form, and trying to keep that the same week to week as you do add weight.
Yeah, because if you can't do that, realistically, a form of progressive overload could be next week I'm going to do the same weight and just make it, let's say your last 2 reps, your form started to change maybe, next week your goal could be, I'm going to keep the same weight and make sure those last 2 reps look like all the other reps did. And in some ways, that is a form of progressive overload.
That's a great point, actually, because I find like for us to, especially with clients, but for me to push to areas that I've not pushed to before, my form is probably going to deviate. Like when I get to those top end ranges of like, I'm going to try for, even if it's like a 5 rep max or a new 1 rep max, or I'm just going to try and do more reps on this weight. Like those last couple, they're grinding weights, like grinding reps.
And I think, and I almost think like if you're especially, you know, like let's say 5 sets of 5 or like 3, that kind of thing. I think if you're maybe like a little bit higher, not so applicable, but I think if you're definitely at the lower end on the rep range spectrum, to a certain extent, if you're testing something max, I think you do want form to deviate, because that's just going to highlight where your weaknesses are. That highlights areas that you need to get stronger, and therefore highlights areas that you can improve on to be able to, next time you test, do better. So I think if you're testing and your form doesn't deviate, like, are you actually going heavy enough?
Yeah, because that's so true, actually, because I never understood the idea of like accessory movements, in the sense of like, well, I'm just going to bench press. Why would I need to add in a pause bench press? Why would I need to like add in different types of this exercise? And it wasn't until like I just figured out like anything over like 120 on a bench, my right shoulder just comes off of the bench. So like for me to get the bar to my chest as I'm lowering it down, that last inch to get to my chest, the only way I can do that, my left side stays tight, like my back's nice and tight, my right shoulder goes boop.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then I get the shoulder pain, then I get the elbow pain, and it's like being able to like look at that now and go, oh, okay, so the way I progress this exercise is like, because I've realized I've tested my forms deviating there, I can look back and go, oh, well, I need to add a pause in, or I need to do some kind of slow tempos to get it down to my chest.
Yep.
But weight overall is...
I think so. I think it's king.
Yeah. And the biggest thing I would say with weight, progressive overload wise, is just smaller jumps.
Yeah, I think this is where people... This is the mistake people make when it comes to adding weight to progressive overload, because they just think... I don't know, I feel like people think when you say, oh, let's add some weight, it's just like, right, I'm going to add 5 kilos, I'm going to add 10 kilos. Just like, you know, add a kilo.
Yeah.
Add 1 kilo.
And genuinely add 1 kilo, because I think look at how long you want to keep going for. And say for example, we are basically, when we are doing this, when we are progressively overloading, when we are adding weight, and we are going to get to those points where form starts to deviate, we want that to be at a place where it's just starting to deviate. Like, it's not at a place where I literally cannot keep the same form. And if you take those bigger jumps, you're going to go from controlling a weight to not being able to control a weight very quickly.
Yeah. I know for a fact I wouldn't do it because I'd get bored. But I would love to take bench press or something. And I don't know, maybe start at about 80% and just do a single. And then every week, or maybe start a little bit higher, 85, 90%, do a single. And every week, just put a kilo on it for a year.
So,
and see if I can keep up with it.
It's not that I'm doing that, but I'm practically, apart from like some weeks, I'm going to be taking that approach going forward.
Yeah, but I mean, like keep the rep ranges the same, like everything, just like
everything the same,
and just add a kilo and see if, like, just to see if you can stick with it.
Yeah. Well, I always think that, because like when you say 1 kilo a week doesn't sound like a lot, that's 50 kilos in a year.
Yeah.
So like if you said to me, add 50 kilos to your bench press, I wouldn't.
Yeah, if I said, all right, I can add 50 kilos to your bench press in a year, who's not going to take that?
But like, so here's a question. Why don't we do that?
Because we like variation, don't we?
Yeah.
And like we get bored and like...
Because technically, and like there will get to a time where you just cannot add any weight to the bar. You've hit your max.
Yeah.
And like, this is the question. And does this is, and you tell me, and if you understand what I'm trying to get at, does progressive overload, so like you getting stronger, is that because you've added weight each week, or can you add weight each week because you're getting stronger? Does that make sense? Like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg, in the sense of like every week I go to lift a heavier weight.
Yeah.
Is that because last week I lifted this weight?
Yeah.
So then my body's adapted to make sure I can lift a heavier weight in the future?
Mm-hmm.
Or like, or is that, does that make any sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. So there is something called the repeated bout effect, which the repeated bout effect is basically, you know, the number one priority of the human body is survival, right? Like, do not die. So if you apply stress to the body, the human body, and it's quite hard stress, so like heavy bench press, and the next day there's loads of DOMs and you're sore or whatever, like your body's quite quickly going to respond and go, well, that hurt. I'm not going to let that happen again. And it will recover and get stronger so that like next time you do it, one, yeah, your nervous system has improved a little bit to be able to, you know, synchronize and coordinate all of those muscles that are needed, joints that are used. But secondly, it recognizes, well, we've done this before. Like, I guess if you wanted to simplify it, we've done this before, it hurt before, like it's not going to let that happen again.
Yeah.
So is that what you mean?
Yeah, just in the sense of like your body's just, every time I do something, there's an equal and opposite like kind of reaction to what I'm doing.
Because it's kind of like in the same way of, but slightly different, but in the same way of, if you were to never change the weight over time, if you just do 5 sets of 5 at the same weight for 10 weeks, by the end of the 10 weeks, it's just going to feel so much easier.
Yeah.
Because the body's just like, oh, we've done this before. We've done this before. We've done this before.
Yeah.
But the first week, it might have been really heavy.
Yeah.
And then week 2, it's just like, we've done this before. Like, let's not let that happen again.
And that does seem to happen, doesn't it? Like when you do go week to week using, if not the same weight, like the same rep ranges, and you do take smaller jumps, I find like there comes a time where I can take a big jump.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Like I take small jumps week to week, 2.5 kilos like each side, like if that. Yeah. To the point of then when it comes to the end, like 4 weeks, I'm going to test this out, and I've gained like it's 10 kilos have gone up, and it's like,
yeah. And I think if you base it on that theory, then actually you probably don't need to go up every week, because you could, like, week 1 is the shock. God, that was heavy. Body's response is, well, that's heavy. Let's not do that again, or cause that much damage again. And then week 2, let's say you did the exact same thing. You're not going to cause as much damage, but like your body's only had one exposure to this. So like realistically, it's not going to have adapted to, oh my God, this is really easy now on week 2.
Mm.
So then I guess there's a question of like, could you just increase weight every other week?
Well, isn't that very similar to how weightlifting does their percentages? In the sense of like, I've heard like when I speak to Ali and Jasper, they talk about like, you have a certain percentage, which is like your quote unquote learning percentage, where it's hard enough so like you can't just throw the bar around, but like heavy enough so you can't just throw the bar around, but it's not so difficult that your like technique basically
you're not going to start missing reps and that kind of stuff.
So is it very similar in that sense of like you have this working range where your body's like just has to adapt to it before you can leapfrog to the next stage?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think it does take a little bit of time. I guess there's going to be slight variations because although, every exercise is a skill, there is obviously like a continuum of what these skills are. And, weightlifting is probably the most skillful movement with a barbell. So therefore, like, they are purposely practicing the skill.
Yeah.
Whereas if you're like bench pressing, for example, although you are practicing the skill, but you're maybe purposely actively trying to get stronger.
Yes, got you. Yeah. So even though very similar goals because of the skill element within it, that's the thing that makes it more difficult to progress the weight.
There's more coordination required in a snatch than what there is in a bench press.
That's the same go if you went all the way back down, like back squat, like to a leg press. Like
Yeah.
a leg press is so much easier to progress on because of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
But I think adding weight is the main thing in that sense. But like, again, standardizing your form would be kind of something to focus on. And like the increase in weight, that will like increase your total like volume, but your total volume could also be increased by increasing the reps. So like, if you're not going to increase the weight, you could increase the reps.
Yeah, and I think you could almost, if you're well trained enough, I wouldn't necessarily suggest this for a beginner maybe, but I think if you're well trained enough, you could just sort of, you know, if there's a day comes where it's like, oh, I should be going heavier, but I don't really feel up to it, you could kind of like run off the fly a little bit and say, oh, well, I'll just keep the weight the same and I'll do one more rep.
Yeah. And
the only reason I wouldn't suggest that to a beginner is because it's not applicable to them from a physiological point of view, because it is still very applicable, but I think it might just create a little bit of chaos, because 1 week they're doing this many reps, next week they're doing this many reps, and I think if you're a beginner, you probably just need to learn that you need some structure and consistency, whereas if you're a little bit more well trained, you kind of like understand the chaos and the grey areas a bit better. Yeah.
So like, if I was to come in as a beginner, to stay with the same rep range, to understand and get used to that, because I'm going to like, exercises feel different at different rep ranges. So because of the weight that you're going to be using. So like, as I start to keep the rep ranges the same, I can progress week to week on the weight.
Yeah, but I also just think as maybe a more advanced trainer, you probably or hopefully have a better perception in your mind of kind of like, oh, well, I am a bit tired today, so I might just do an extra rep as opposed to add more weight. Whereas I think like if you're a beginner, you haven't really experienced what fatigue feels like in a gym properly, if we're being honest, you don't really know how to make those decisions.
Yeah.
And you could just be making those decisions because like, I think there's a difference between feeling physically fatigued and tired that you don't really feel like you can add weight, and just being like, I can't be asked. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? I feel like there's a difference between that.
It's really hard to be self-aware enough to know which end of the spectrum you fall on as well.
Exactly. And I think if you're a more advanced trainer and have more experience, you probably are putting yourself in a better position to understand whether like you're just being a bit of a bitch, or you are actually tired.
Yeah, no, but I think that's part of the reason. Like when I set my programming up for people, like when it's new people, like I do it with everyone, because like for me, I always give rep ranges for people to fall within. The reason I like doing that is because like it takes people a few weeks to figure out their weight, and like I'm just saying stick within this rep range, but go as hard as you can on the weight you use. So if I give a 6 to 8 and you could do 10 reps, well, the weight needs to go up because I want you to fall within 6 to 8. And once they get to an idea of the weights that work for them within that rep range, the basic rule that I give, and the reason I give this is just because like it keeps them consistent in the fact of saying like, some people are afraid to go up. I kind of, for me, it tackles two birds with one stone. So some people are afraid to go up in weight, and some people want to go up in weight too much.
Yeah.
So by giving a rep range and by saying to them, I want you, if I'm doing 3 sets of 6 to 8, I want you to be able to do all 3 sets at the same weight, but 8 reps for every set. And then once you get that, then you can up the weight.
Yeah.
The reason I like doing that is because it stops the people who want to go too heavy going too heavy. They're like, oh, I can do more, I can do more. It's like, those are the people that, especially beginners, are likely to be like, their form's starting to deviate way more. And then you have the people which are like, could push further.
Yeah.
And it just means like, oh, I've got a target that I can hit now. Like, it gives them a bit more of a focus of like, oh, I know that I could get to 10.
Yeah.
So I need to up the weight.
Yeah.
It's just like, for me, it like kills those two birds with one stone of like, you can increase your weight and you can increase your reps week to week, but you just have to hit these on 1 week. You have to hit all sets at the top end of the rep range before you go up next week.
Yep.
Because then it just keeps progression. It's like, it's such a nice way of doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's just a really clear and easy way for people to see progress, because if you give that target rep range and people, let's say that target rep range is 6 to 8, and on week 1 people hit 6, and you're just like, right, well next week just try and hit 7. Like, and that's a really easy target to give them to show progressive overload.
Yeah.
And then work your way up. Like next week hit 8.
Yeah, easy.
Like,
and then like a week after that, if you feel like you're comfortable enough, right, now go up in weight.
yeah, and it's just like, it's funny because this stuff is so simple.
Yeah.
Yet so many people get it wrong.
But this is, I think, so like, I find it, I said to Jasper yesterday, I was like, oh, programming for bodybuilding is really easy. And he was like, why? And I was like, because I just write a program and they follow it for 4 weeks. And then we take out exercises they don't like, or exercises, or increase the difficulty of the exercise depending on where they are with their journey. And he was like, do you not prescribe the weight? I was like, no. Because this gives them the ability to auto-regulate without but with the pre-understanding of, I've still got to try and beat or match last week.
Yeah, exactly. I really try not to prescribe weights for people because also there are so many factors that come into play on how you feel on a day-to-day basis when you go into the gym. And if there's somebody who's relatively new to training and it's just like, right, go heavier. And on a day when they go into the gym and it's like, I've had a really bad night's sleep, I'm not eating, I'm loaded up on caffeine too much to the point where I'm going the other way, I feel like crap, but I've got to do this really heavy back squat. Just realistically, I'm not getting any benefits out of that. I just do the same as you do. It's just kind of like, you're going to hit this rep range. You're going to use a weight that is as heavy as your form allows. Yeah. And if it can be heavier than last week, then great.
Yeah. And it's so simple because if we go back to the adding weight thing and the fact that we said you don't necessarily need to up your weight every single week, that would be where you kind of look at it and go, okay, so I don't necessarily need to up my weight every week, but I'm always going to try to do that. So I'm not going to get any detriment if I don't up my weight. So do you know what I mean? It stops the kind of panic mode of wait, just by having this kind of smarter approach of just it doesn't actually matter.
Yeah. One thing I will say on that for any beginners that are listening is kind of if this literally is one of your first couple of weeks in the gym, probably expect to be able to add weight each week and maybe expect to be able to add bigger jumps than a kilo each week, because if you're really new to this, you're absolutely nowhere near your ceiling level of strength, and the initial adaptations that's going to happen are going to be from the nervous system in terms of being able to coordinate and synchronize muscle tissue. So your ability to add weight at the very beginning is going to be really, really high. You'll be able to add a lot of weight to begin with, and then you'll probably get, 4 to 8 weeks in, and that's quite a big rep range, but probably quite a big range, but depending on how hard you have been working in those first couple of weeks, probably 4 to 8 weeks in, you'll probably start to notice, right, well, I'm not sure I can add 5 kilos or whatever. So now you might be down to adding 1 kilo, or you might be down to keeping the weight the same and adding an additional rep like we've spoken about. But as the more advanced you are, adding weight gets harder because you're closer to your ceiling of strength.
Yeah, and if you're struggling to add weight, and you can't add any more reps, this is where, for me, and you could tell me what would be your next step.
What if you can't add weight and you can't do any more reps?
How would I still make sure I'm progressing?
So for me, the most natural thing from that is just slow down a little bit.
Yeah, tempo.
Yeah.
Tempo for me would be my next one as well, because slowing down an exercise normally means that we're going to be controlling it. Again, if we go back to what we said about think of getting to those top end rep ranges, my form's deviating a little bit. So okay, well, let's control it a little bit better.
Yeah.
And that's basically what slowing it down means.
Yeah. Yeah. And how that is causing progressive overload is essentially, if you were to just take, a set of 10 reps and your standardized form was kind of, right, I'm going to do a 2 second eccentric, 2 second concentric. So 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up. And so therefore a rep takes you 4 seconds. You're going to do 10 reps. A set's going to take you 40 seconds. If you now make that lowering phase last 4 seconds, but keep the concentric the same, so 4 seconds down, 2 seconds up, a rep now takes you 6 seconds. So a set of 10 is going to take you 60 seconds, which is 20 seconds longer. So the amount of time that your muscle spends under tension per set has increased. So therefore, that, and that is a good way to add progressive overload. And also, I think, again, the same rules apply to this as what we spoke about with weight. I know I just gave you the example of doing a 4-second eccentric on each rep, but you don't have to do that. Like, you could just do a 4-second eccentric on maybe the first 2 reps of each set, or even the first set, and then do the other couple of sets just as you were normally doing them, because you're starting to get tired and fatigue kicked in and you can't control that slow eccentric anymore. Again, you don't need to just like drastically slow down all of the reps and all of the sets. Like if we're being like almost absolute, like just slowing down the first rep of the first set and then keeping everything else the same is a form of progressive overload. Yeah, you could probably do more than that, but that is still progressive overload.
100%. Like when I start to see, because I've had it a few times with clients actually, and I think I've done this without even realizing why. I do that quite a lot, I think. But like, I've had a client who I've gone, I just want you to pause for a second on the first rep or the first 2 reps at the bottom. And it's purely just because I don't want to increase the weight yet, because they're still a little bit unstable with the weight we're currently using. But I do want them to like learn to control it better and still make progression.
Yeah.
So it's like, just by adding in like a slower on the way down, or like just kind of changing the intent a little bit. Like I want to see an actual change of direction occur rather than just like something which quickly flutters by. Yeah,
especially in that bottom position. If we're talking about a squat, for example, especially in that bottom position, because it's probably the weakest position for most people. It's the position that people want to rush through because they don't feel strong there, because it is the weakest position. So therefore, the risk of injury in that position out of the whole movement is probably the highest when you're right in the bottom of that squat about to change direction, just because your muscles are going to act in a very different way to perform the concentric. So just slowing that area down and pausing there also just keeps the whole thing a little bit safer.
Yeah, and like those 3 are probably the main for me.
They're certainly the most common, aren't they?
Yeah, I think so. And I think like they're the most commonly I use to kind of progress people. What else? What would be your next one?
I guess so for me, I would say those 3 are probably like my main ones. The others that we could look at are probably ones that's just like, I'm not really too sure what order I'd put them in, and also does it really matter what order I put them in?
Yeah.
But if I was to choose one, let's maybe say like we could start to decrease, or actually maybe this might be the next one actually. We could maybe start to decrease some rest periods.
Okay. Why would this be your next one?
I think just because
I get a little bit not confused, but I understand it in the sense of why that would help you progress. But I don't understand why it gets used as much as it does. Because like I give different rest periods recommendations on like, and like use them as recommendations on programming to like kind of this gap to fall between.
Yeah.
But why would decreasing the rest time improve or progress someone?
Just because essentially their work capacity is going to go up. So if you can perform the same number of sets and reps again, but with less rest than what you had previously, then effectively your work capacity has gone up, and your volume is volume in a certain way, not direct volume if we speak about it in terms of like sets, reps, and weight. Like, but the amount of work that you do in a given amount of time is going to increase.
Right.
And for me, the reason why I would choose this one next for me is because it's the variable that I can cause the least amount of damage. And what I mean by that, like, it's the variable where I can expose them to like the smallest amount of novel stimulus, whereas the other couple that we're going to speak about later on provide a much greater novel stimulus, which for some people might be too much. You know, if I was to say to you, you're going to do 5 sets of 5, in your week 1, you're going to have 3 minutes rest, and as we work our way through, I'm going to progress you to 5 sets of 5, and we're just going to have, I don't know, 2.5 minutes rest. I'm just going to take 30, or 2 minutes 45, just take 15 to 30 seconds off you. In reality, that's quite a small chunk of time, whereas like the other ones we're going to speak about, I think provide such a much bigger new stimulus that the damage that it could cause to muscle tissue might be too great for some people.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I find changing the rest periods, like I don't think I use them as a form of progression, because I just use them as like a guideline to make sure that people like aren't all over the place, to keep it consistent.
Yeah.
So like, because I find people will either want to go again after like 30 seconds, 45 seconds, they're ready to go again because they're bored, or because they're bored, they've now gone on their phone and now they're 5 minutes.
Yeah.
So like, there's no consistency between each set. So then like, yes, you've hit 4 sets of 5 at 90 kilos, but you had 2 minutes rest between set 1 and 2. You then had 3 minutes rest between sets like 2 and 3, and then you had 6 minutes rest between sets 3 and 4.
Yeah.
So it's like, if you had 2 minutes rest or 3 minutes rest between those sets, what would you have done? Does that make sense? Like,
yeah.
And I've been more consistent with monitoring my own rest periods on my bigger compound movement, because I realized how much of a difference it makes.
Yeah.
When I rest, like if I'm going to rest like 5 or 6 minutes between a set of squats, like I'm pretty much going to shift that weight very close to how I did the set before.
Yeah.
If I rest 2 to 3 minutes, it's completely different.
Yeah.
And it's like,
I mean, so if I don't actually probably don't really use rest very often as a form of progressive overload, but if I was to use it, I still think it obviously still needs to be used in the right context. And what I mean by that is, like we spoke earlier about giving a specific rep range of like 6 to 8 for the example that we used, but I would still prescribe, I wouldn't prescribe a window, but in my mind I'd have a window. So for example, if we're doing 5 sets of 5 and they're starting out at 5 minutes rest, I might over time progress them down to having 3 minutes rest. Like you wouldn't end up doing something stupid of doing like 5 sets of 5 with 30 seconds rest, because in reality the amount of weight that they're going to have to use then is going to need to significantly drop. So you still got to make sure you're providing adequate rest to get the stimulus that you're looking for from the sets and reps.
And that would be dictated by energy systems, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So like taking into some kind of consideration what you need, like to recover, what needs to be recovered. And like we've done a really good episode on energy systems before, which like I had a few kind of like blow my mind moments when we were speaking about energy systems, because like it's always confused me. But looking at rest periods just to manage the energy systems you're going to use during a set or during exercises is just really interesting.
Yeah. And that's pretty much how I would guide my rest period. So yeah, it wouldn't be a case of just let's work our way all the way down until you're doing 5 sets of 5 and you've got 15 seconds rest between sets, because you're just completely taking it out of context and completely missing the point of the stimulus.
And that's really interesting. Sorry, I've had one of those. I've heard them called blinding flashes of the obvious, because it's like the reason when you look, or someone who may have just gone through their personal training course, or like someone who's been a personal trainer who doesn't quite understand like why something's the way it is like, if you were to look at like a standard program, like people prescribe like longer rest periods for heavier weights, and like powerlifters, you see them resting for longer periods of time, and it's like the bro in me just goes, I kind of just need to recover, like it's heavy, but like doesn't realize that actually you're waiting for your energy systems to replenish. And it's like, oh, okay. So that changes like the way I program, that
Yeah.
changes when I look at, right, I'm using 8 to 12 reps, which means I'm going to be hitting this energy system, which means I need this amount of rest. It's like, right, sweet, got you.
Makes programming easier, right?
Yes, it's funny, isn't it? Like, I know it sounds stupid, but like, I think, and I'm so guilty for this, is like the base level of understanding can be enough for you to get by until it's not.
Yeah.
And what I mean by that is like, you can get by with minimal knowledge if you're a coach, just by knowing the basics. But then as soon as something doesn't work the way you think it's going to work, or someone asks you a question as to why, and you don't know that deeper level, it's like, oh no, like I'm unstuck here. And I get them quite often, and I'm like, I find it really interesting now, like, right, I've got to understand why this is happening. I've got to understand why this is happening. And you can go all the levels deep until you've hit a PhD, but like, you need to still have some level of understanding as to why you're doing what you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you're going to go on a journey depending on how long you've been coaching people, but you should always strive to have some form of rationale and reasoning behind why you've got certain exercises, why they're in a certain order, why you're doing certain rep ranges, why you got certain rest periods. Like, because otherwise you're just picking exercises for the sake of it, really.
But I think it goes into like the same as why people train the way they do, or why beginners like or why people new to the gym either drop off or like find it hard to take like the advice, or find it hard to understand if they're the person who needs to go harder or needs to pull back.
Yeah.
It's like, it's the same reason as why I didn't go, oh, I don't know enough.
Yeah.
It's just the ego thing that kicks in of like, I don't want to highlight what I don't know right now.
Yeah.
Because like, what I do know, I need to hold on to because it's all I've got.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Like,
yeah, absolutely.
it's such like, I think it's such a natural thing for humans to just want to hoard and like kind of scarcity and just keep hold of things.
Yeah.
It's amazing how much that bleeds over into every other aspect of your life when it comes into like, if that's human nature, is to just collect things, then when I collect information, I don't want to highlight to people. I want to highlight to people that I've got information. Not that I don't have all of this information. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course.
And it's like, I know that's natural, but for me, I find it really, really, really interesting. Like, the more I become aware of like how much I am unaware, and how much I don't know, is the more I really, really start to enjoy the journey of it more, because I was so concentrating on what I do know, because I was so afraid to look at what I don't know, because I know how big that cupboard is.
Yeah.
And it's like, but it's the same with every single aspect of every part of everyone's life. It's like,
it's just part of the learning process, isn't it?
Yeah. It's
the more you know, the more you realize you don't know.
And the Dunning-Kruger effect is like, hits you from nowhere,
smack in the face
with everything.
Yeah.
It's funny though, when you get those, because when you realize that's what's happening, and you're like, oh no. Like, I look back and I'm like, I'm so sorry to all of my clients who were with me in the first year.
But,
it's like, but I guess the conversation I was just having with one of the girls, like on the personal training course that Mark runs, is like, you've got to start somewhere, and you've got to get experience, because that's one of the ways you gain the knowledge and gain the understanding of what you don't know. It's because like, when you first, same as training, like, if you think adding weight is going to be the one sole way you progress, but you don't realize that your form kind of needs to be very similar, your rest times kind of need to be similar, your tempo needs to kind of be similar to make that weight progression actually give you the results of progressive overload that you're looking for. Like, you won't know that until you start training and you start looking at all these things. And it's the same as any avenue you go down when you're on a learning process or you're trying to improve, is like, until you start doing it, you don't know. Like, the next one. So after rest periods, where do you think you'd go after that?
Maybe range of motion. I think so. We can increase the range of motion that people are working in, and obviously this is really only going to be applicable to certain exercises. there's going to be some exercises where you're just increasing range of motion for the sake of increasing range of motion. And there's a difference between, so for example, if we were to take a pec fly, there's a difference between the amount of range of motion you can create in your arm and the amount of range of motion we can create to target the pec muscle. So like, we're talking about full range of motion within the anatomical variation of the muscle for the individual, which is probably a bit too deep for where we're at now. But so, realistically, this is going to be applicable to only certain exercises. And for example, you could take like, the one exercise I quite like doing is if we could take a reverse lunge, and we could take it to like a front foot elevated reverse lunge. So you stand on something that's, I don't know, 1 inch to 1.5 inches high, and then you reverse lunge off that. And then, and this is a thing that I find quite funny. It's like, I get clients to do that sometimes, but they don't take their knee all the way to the ground. And it's kind of like, we're just completely defeating the object of the deficit here.
Yeah.
So like, we still got to go full range.
Yeah, it's
like, we may as well just stay on the ground otherwise.
I kind of like, and that's the conversation you have to have with clients when you're kind of going through that, is like, the reason we use range of motion is because it's going to be harder.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, we're going to put your like muscles in probably more of a lengthened position than they've been in.
Yeah.
And like, putting you under load there is going to feel very, very difficult.
Yeah. And usually like how we create this additional range of motion usually places like additional range at the end of the eccentric. So like you say, putting things in more of a lengthened position. And that's, for most people, a really weak position in most exercises. So, it hurts. It's hard.
Is that because
it creates DOMs?
Don't use it.
Yeah, it's a range that you just don't ever go to. So
like, I kind of explained it to clients when people can't do a push-up, and they can do like 3/4 of a push-up.
Yeah.
They can't go chest to floor.
Yeah.
And they say the chest to floor, like, oh, it really hurts. Like,
yeah.
That's because you're so closed all the time working on your laptop. You're so bent over in this hunch position with shoulders forward that like your chest hasn't been to that open position.
It's the same as when you see people doing pull-ups, just like, right, let's work on eccentric pull-ups, and they're nice and controlled to begin with, and they get to like the last little bit, and all they do is drop.
Yeah.
So they never control that last bit, like that very end range eccentric component is a weak position for a lot of people. So they don't want to be there, or they just try and rush their way through that position.
Yeah, which is why, like, if you think about what we mentioned earlier with tempos, when you pair that with range of motion, in the sense of like, I'm going to try to make every exercise go through its fullest range, take every muscle through like its fullest range of motion. Like, you want to do that and make sure like those end ranges are really controlled, because like you could go through the full range of motion, but like you'll go at the right tempo for the middle part, and then the first bit's really quick or the last bit's really quick, and it's like try and control everything. And that's like when I think of the things I'm saying on a constant basis to clients, it's like slow that bit down, increase the speed of that bit. Like, does that make sense?
Oh, I have that conversation all the time of just like the area where people change direction in exercises, and just like slow that down.
I want to know there's a definite change of direction there.
Yeah, but I think people try and rush it because, like, for most places, that change of direction is like, it's a weak position in all exercises. So people just try and rush through it because they know it's going to be hard. So just try and get through it faster.
Yeah.
But you're just 9 times out of 10, all that really starts to happen is, especially if you're talking about things like a lunge or a squat or something like that, all that happens is people just lose positions and they lose control, and they just end up wobbling around all over the place. And it's harder. It feels harder to do it slower, but you're going to have so much more control over the positions, and long term, it's definitely going to be better for you.
That's so funny because like I look at all my training and I do it all of the time. Like, I know when I'm getting towards a heavy weight because like everything I've done up to that point goes out the window. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
Scared now.
Yeah, but then I think like if you're at that point, like you could probably maybe afford for things that, especially if you've got like years and years of experience of training, again, that is potentially another form of progressive overload. You know, if you say,
100%.
right, I'm going to go tempo, but then on this last rep, I'm just not sure I'm going to be able to make the tempo, but I need to get an extra rep. Like, you could just fire it out. It's still an extra rep. But again, I would say that I would only use that in a way for somebody who's like a more advanced trainer.
Yeah. So
because otherwise they're just not going to have the control.
No, and that's part of the reason we'll use tempo and range of motion paired together, is because to control the ranges of motion, to be able to teach someone to control their body. And that's why, like, part of the fact that tempo and range of motion is in here isn't only because of the demand it puts on your muscles. It's actually because of the technique that we can drill into you by slowing a movement down and making you move for its full range of motion, because you're then performing the exercise like to the best of your ability and its ability, under control. And then the loading of the weight that goes on top of that is going to be the biggest thing.
Exactly. It's actually a little bit like, which we'll mention it, but I don't think we should do too much right now, because we could maybe do a whole other episode on this kind of stuff. But it's actually a little bit like partials. Like, you could use partials at the end of a set to try and get some additional volume in as a form of progressive overload.
Yes. Well, this is the interesting thing of like learning the other day, like from Jordan Peters, when he says about the lengthened position the shortened position fatigues much sooner than the lengthened position. So you could actually still get some extra volume into that lengthened position. Yeah. So interesting.
Yeah.
Like, because then you can start, this is the thing that bodybuilders do when they don't realize why they were doing it back when they were doing it, is partials didn't realize that. But the reason partials are so good is because you're using that stronger position, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like, it's really, really interesting. Like, you'll see people doing certain things in the gym and you'll be like, why are they doing that? Like, and you're just like, well, I guess I'll just do it.
Yeah. It's kind of like when you're doing a pec fly and you can't get all the way in, there's still going to be, some benefit to just doing like a couple of half reps at the end. But again, like, we could maybe do an episode on like maybe like slightly more advanced ways to progressively overload rather than.
Yeah, because I mean, we've got sets is written down here, and we'll go through that in a minute. But we've got additional exercises as well, like supersets and stuff like that. And I guess like maybe we do a whole episode on intensifiers and things like that as a way to keep progressing.
Yeah, because I think like supersets, although it is a form of progressive overload, like, it's such a big form. Like, it's a whole other exercise.
Yeah, it completely changes it for me. Like, it changes one exercise. Like, I love doing straight sets on things. Like, I find it purely because I really enjoy trying to get better each week and supersets. But you do a lot of supersets, don't you?
Yeah, and things like mechanical drop sets. Like, there's so many. We should maybe we'll do an episode on like more advanced ways.
Yeah, I think so.
To intensify exercises.
We need to set a camera up.
Yeah.
We'll set a camera up right here. We'll find a way.
What of you?
Honestly, you should see the room we're in. It's brilliant. I just love that, like, the air vents within this room. Like,
we should get in there.
Do you reckon he'd let?
If that was empty, we'd do it in there. I'd do it in there.
We could turn that.
That'd be loads better.
Do you reckon we could convince him?
Don't know where I'd put all that stuff. When the change rooms are done, maybe.
That's beautiful.
That's a good shout.
Because you could foam pad that room.
Yeah.
Or to be confirmed.
That used to be a sauna.
Did it? Shut up.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes sense. Wait, what was this then?
I don't know.
If that was a
change room, maybe? I don't know.
This building's so old. Last one will be set.
Yeah.
So just increase the amount of sets you do.
Just doing like an extra set maybe. But again, like, could drastically increase volume. I think if you notice what we've done is we've worked our way through these, we've listed them in a way where the amount of additional work you have to do is kind of like almost the smallest. So we've gone from like, you can add weight, and that being like, you can add a kilo. So like, it's a very small amount of weight. We can add reps, like you can add one extra rep, like it's a very small amount. Whereas like, and now we're working our way down to like adding a whole extra set. So like the amount of additional stimulus that creates is so great that it can cause a lot of damage. And I think a lot of people, if they trained properly and progressively, like, you'd be surprised how little work you need to actually be able to get stronger.
This is something that I just find really amazing. Like, and it does work, and it's just like trying to just put all of your effort into the sets you do rather than just spreading that effort over periods of sets. And like, that's the reason I think I like to use multiple sets for things, and I've realized this over the years of programming, is purely if it's a skill thing. If I'm trying to nail an exercise down, I want to put someone through 4 or 5 sets of that exercise, so each time I can correct something. And it's the same with myself. Like, if I'm trying to nail a movement pattern, it's a big lift that I'm trying to make sure I do every lift exactly the same. I want to hit multiple sets of that exercise to make sure I can adjust my form when needed. Like, whereas when it is just like an output movement of like chucking myself on a machine fly, for example, like, I don't necessarily need to do a ton of sets. I just need to push towards that failure point.
Yeah, exactly.
That's progressive overload. I think like the kind of applicable thing and the takeaway we want to give you is like being deliberate with your choice of progressive overload and understanding like when and where's the right place to put it in that sense. And like where we've spoken about weight and kind of the whole way through this, we've spoken about as and when and why to change a certain thing and like to add a certain kind of progressive, like a way to progress. We've gave you like the ways to do that and why we do it. Is there like anything specific you want to say on that?
Well, I think it's just like, it comes back to, we talk about it a lot in terms of like being consistent, and that's, you know, a key component to actually making progress in a gym. And I think if you're not being deliberate and being consistent with your progressive overload, then realistically you're probably just not being consistent overall. Like, don't like 1 week go, oh, this week I'm going to add some weight, and now I'll change the tempo, and now I'll do an extra rep, and now I'll do an extra set, because if you're doing that, you've actually got no measure of if you're getting stronger or not, because you're always doing something different. There's too many variables going on. So try and be deliberate with your form of progressive overload. So for example, for the first 4 weeks, could you just kind of, you know, you might want to start with tempo to begin with, just especially if you're new, because it's a nice easy one to keep control over movements. So you maybe progress the tempo as the weeks go by, like add an additional second on the way down, add an additional second in the pause component, for example, and then do that for 4 weeks. Then the second 4 weeks, now you could start maybe looking at increasing weight, for example. So like, be deliberate with your choice of progressive overload, because if you're not, you're going to struggle to actually track if you're making progress.
Yeah, I think that's why programming is so difficult, is when you look at what we've mentioned, those are ways to, like, progressive overload is each week trying to progress someone. It's the same as like when we change exercises, it's trying to progress you. Like, that's always what we're trying to do with training. I guess in life is, can we progress each week, and what can we change or add or take away to keep that progression going in a like consistent pattern. So that's why like all of the things we've mentioned is things we play around with when it comes to programming for someone. So like for you, that's why it might seem confusing of like, well, what do I do and when do I do it? And it's like, for me, it's like, it's learn to do the exercise, get the exercise to a point where your form's pretty good or reasonably good. Then from there, start to add weight, start to add reps, and just keep like, because if your exercise, if it looks good, chances are your tempo's pretty good. 2 seconds down, 2 seconds up is like kind of just an easy standard for people when they're first starting out.
Yeah.
Taking it through its fullest range of motion that you can, under control, then week to week keeping that form the same and just increasing the reps or the weight.
Yep.
Boom.
Good.
Enjoyed that one.
Yeah, that was good.
Amazing. So we'll keep going with this every week. Every week.
We're on track so far.
Every week. We're 2 weeks in and we haven't missed a week. This is great. Amazing. So thank you very much for listening. We'll see you on the next one. in the intro, I felt like I was like an over-excited puppy, or like I'm just one of these I saw a thing the other day which was like, don't you just hate it when trainers are over-excited about exercise, or trainers get too excited about exercise? Good job, isn't it? Wasn't that what we're supposed to do? I'm pretty sure I gotta like exercise to be able to talk about it as much as I do. But I going off of that, this is a massive tangent. That was progressive overload. This is more about the mentality when it comes to training. Genuinely believe that most people, most of the time, think that like you have to love training, or you've got to change your life completely to enjoy it, and it's not that way at all. You've just got to find a way to be a little bit fitter and a little bit healthier for whatever reason, whether it's to change your body image, whether it's you've got a goal for performance like strength, fitness, any type of activity like that, or whether it's just because like you want to live longer so you can like play with your grandkids when you're older. I think whatever your reason, health and fitness can fit into your life, whether that's half an hour once a week or whether that's kind of 2 hours every day, it doesn't necessarily matter what it is. This is just an avenue for self-improvement, and this is just a way to meet other people who are trying to do the same thing. I'm not going to babble on anymore, but thank you so much. I guess trying to let you know what we're doing elsewhere. myptcourse.com is going back to myptcourse.com. Company's just called My PT Course, Charlie. But My PT Course is going back to live days. We've done our first couple of live days now. We're going into the last couple as we go up towards Christmas. When it comes to 2023, we have 4 courses running with live days within them. I think there's like 7 to 10 live days in each course. And it's basically going to teach you how to deliver exercise and how to perform exercises correctly. So if you're looking to become a level 3 personal trainer and you're not sure about doing an online course because you want to learn a bit more about how to actually perform exercises, then myptcourse.com would be where I would head to have a look at what courses we're running, when we're running them, and if it suits you. Majority of the course is done online. All of the assessments and all of the lectures are online, and there is a ton of information on there. But when it comes to the practical elements of personal training, which I believe shouldn't ever be taken away from it, like the online was great during COVID, but I believe in-person training, you will learn so much from this course. So come on down to that one, guys. That would be great. If you want to find me or Mark, Mark's at Mark Origin Series on Instagram, and his company's, if you type in origin-series.com online, you will find Mark's company. Mine's Hat the Body, Hat the Mind on Instagram and in Google. We, different people, different points of views, different companies looking to do very similar things of help people. So hopefully you can find some support. I think, like, I know Mark's got a lot of like courses on there when it comes to nutrition and things like that. Again, like if you want to become a PT, look towards the Go Origin Series. If you're looking for like group programming, stuff like that, both myself and Mark offer programming and group programs. For me, I've got a lot of free resources, as in blogs, and I've got a live webinar which talks all about like fat loss. Yeah, fat loss. Jesus, why is this so difficult? Talks about muscle building and fat loss, and just like how to get the best body composition you want. So try, if you can, to have a look at that. It's a free webinar. It's about an hour long with some like questions totted on at the end for that. But that's normally gives people a good understanding of the first place to go when it comes to improving the way they look. So hopefully, guys, this gives you a good understanding of what to do and where to find us. Thank you so much. If you can leave us a 5-star rating review on iTunes, you can screenshot this, share this on Instagram. We'd be very, very appreciative, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We will see you on the next one.